Good morning, Jorge. We are convened today for our second podcast dialogue. I'm delighted to be with you. I think we've agreed that today we can't avoid discussing what is the elephant in the room of probably 99% of discussions that are going on in the world these days. That elephant being Donald Trump. He has caused a fundamental shift in people's attitude toward politics and the world. A lot of fear, a lot of shame, a lot of disgrace. I tend to agree with what Colin Powell said during the campaign. He said that the candidacy of Donald Trump was a national disgrace. I consider what happened on Election Day in 2016 to be another day of infamy in American history. There was Pearl Harbor, which President Roosevelt called a day of infamy. And then there was Election Day 2016, which elected a man who was clearly, unmistakably, a pathological liar, a sexual predator, a man whose arrogance is outdone only by his ignorance. So basically, we were in a situation where upwards of 60 million Americans voted for a con man to inhabit the Oval Office, the most powerful office in the world. And that, to me, is the most dangerous aspect. The inability of the American people to recognize a swindler when they see one, and it does not give me great hope for the future.
I'll just to piggyback on that. You said they didn't realize he was a swindler. You don't think that out of those 60 million, there's a big amount of them that knew exactly who they were voting for, but either they vote party line, they were voting against Hillary Clinton. I feel like we have to. There's a bit of the case of they wanted something different. They wanted to create a bit of a shockwave, and they might have, it went too far, and that he actually won, that he actually is doing some of the things he said he wanted to do. And I would love to listen to the people that voted for him, but weren't really committed to him and his ideas. They were more just against Hillary Clinton or very Republican or very conservative, but they have to vote for him.
I agree with you. I have to do some subtraction from my 60 million number. I would have to subtract all of those Republicans who put party before country. I would have to put all of those Americans who, for one reason or another, had a visceral hatred of Hillary Clinton. I encountered it a few times during the 16 months of the campaign when I met Americans, a kind of venom toward that woman. And even though they recognized that Trump was not what they should have in a president, they would not vote for Hillary Clinton. So you're right, I have to subtract quite tens of millions from the 60 million number. I'd have to say that only 20 or 30 million Americans were unable to identify a cretinous individual when they saw one.
Do you think that hate towards Hillary can be created with 8 years that we saw of the conservative side just hate Obama, hate the Democrats? Like, there was a moment that the Democrats couldn't do a thing right in the eyes of the Fox News and especially the conservative news, but it was just like this hate that we're now seeing with Obamacare, that for 8 years the Republicans hated Obamacare, and now they are having a big hard time realizing that they don't have a better solution for the insurance issue. So are we seeing that, like, well, we hate Hillary, she can't be president, so we're gonna bring our own guy, Trump, and now they're like, well, this isn't the solution that we wanted. We just were really against the Democrats and the other things. So, like, Trump I feel he needs to get a little less credit for like who he is and the fact that he was at the perfect time, and it just all somehow worked out that he won. Because at the beginning of his election campaign, no one, like, it was a joke. It was like, oh, here comes a guy who's just yelling at the RNC and like looking at the system and going like, I'm gonna disrupt you. And the system didn't care. The system of the RNC there kind of was like, oh, we still got Jeb Bush, we still got Ted Cruz, and then little by little, he just won. And then again, we are him against Hillary. Same thing.
The power of publicity came into play because he was devouring time on the media. The media could not avoid covering him. If you were walking down the street minding your own business, but there's a house on fire, it's almost impossible for you not to stop and watch the house on fire. Trump was the house on fire. And the media coalesced around that and gave him billions of dollars worth of free publicity. It was a perfect storm of luck also that got him into the White House in terms of the opponent that he had and the particular juncture we're at in the economy with manufacturing jobs having disappeared. Even though they're not coming back, here's a man who said, I'm going to bring them back, and I'm going to bring them back quickly. Both lies. Mm-hmm. Impossible to bring them back. They're not coming back. People believed him. Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, Michigan, those three states that won him the election, the cretinous workers, white, blue-collar workers who voted for him, believing that he would be bringing back the jobs. But back to your point about the Republican Congress and its intransigence vis-a-vis Barack Obama, I think there was something more sinister at play than simply anti-democratic feelings in terms of, when I'm talking about anti-democratic, I mean the party. I think the black president had a lot to do with it. There's still racism in America. It's deep, it's profound, and I think that the intransigence against the Obama administration had a lot to do with white America being unhappy with the fact that there was a black man in the White House.
Yeah, I think not an elephant in the room because a lot of people said it, but I don't know if they could have had a black president right afterwards, a female president, a woman leader right after having, like, there's a bit of, I can see how the argument of like, we have to, this nation was built on white male, that part, I'm like, come on, someone has to see it. That would be 12 years if she had won, that in their head they had to be like accepting of what they didn't really want. You can't have, the priest who is the leader standing in front of his parish telling them that, yeah, he agrees that a woman should be the president of the United States, while he, the man, is the leader, and there's, you already have that issue. And I think, and somehow we end up with Trump. Like, we go all around and we end with Trump, who just said lie after lie, who the attitude he had, there's a reality too. The attitude we had is one that a lot of men would like to have, but can't. Most men can't go around and grabbing a woman just because they want to. Either they'll get arrested, there's many reasons why not. But they are out there that they wish they could do that and get away with it. Because there's, the macho, the ego, I don't know why. So they do look up to him for saying the things he's saying and not caring. For doing things that are inappropriate and getting away with it. So Donald Trump is a mystery to me on how it actually, like, what got him elected. Because there's so many little things that could be the main reason.
Meanwhile, I find that we are in an extraordinary moment in history because we have a president who is mocked and ridiculed and laughed at every single day by half the population. If you watch late night television, my wife and I put on our PVR every night Stephen Colbert, and every single night, the monologue, he comes out and he makes cutting, acerbic, fabulously funny and yet serious attacks on the current president of the United States. And we have to scratch our heads and wonder, how did this come about? He is despised. He is absolutely despised. The audience of Colbert every night in the Late Show and the Ed Sullivan Theater in New York cheer every time Colbert cracks a joke at the expense of this president. Is it appropriate? Absolutely. Because let's talk about what's happening now in the United States. Mm-hmm. From my view, he made promises about curtailing illegal immigration, and he made promises about keeping Americans safe. What do we see happening in the United States now? I think it's ethnic cleansing. I would put the label of ethnic cleansing on what is happening. Look at what he called a travel ban, which is actually a Muslim ban, absolutely and positively. Look what happened to the son of Muhammad Ali the other day when he was coming home. Mm-hmm. The son of Muhammad Ali, because he has the name Muhammad, they didn't know who he was. They detained him. He's an American. He has an American passport. They detained him and questioned him. Ethnic cleansing. Look at what is happening vis-a-vis mothers of American-born children who happen to be undocumented immigrants being picked up and shipped over the Mexican border. Ethnic cleansing. Yeah. Hispanics and Muslims. What is happening here, in my view, has profound implications vis-a-vis what some people see as a white and Christian America. And I haven't mentioned the 100 or so bomb threats that have been called into synagogues across the United States and in some cases in Canada.
Yeah, I think you're correct in all that, especially with the way they're targeting so many in different aspects. It's not like one big ban, like that. They're not even hiding it. That's kind of what I'm gonna get here. Is they're not hiding with the Muslim ban that they're doing it, and I think they opened the fact that the president did this executive order may have opened customs and the guards to feel freer at just being like, well, are you a Muslim? Okay, I need to triple check you because of this. I think it opened, it moved the line of what was appropriate. Because we're always playing this line between what is appropriate, what is morally correct, and what would be the easiest thing to do when it comes to illegal immigration. There seem to be going towards what's the easiest thing to do. Well, just start deporting everybody. But you're like, but there's a bit of a gray zone. What happens if, as you said, this Mexican mother had a kid, and that kid is now, let's say, a businessman, he has a business and paying lots of taxes and making jobs for people. Does the country really suffer if his mother is illegally in the country? Many would say, not really. But you're right, the law is the law, and she is illegal. So you are correct in kicking her out of the country. But you might want to have a little bit of, you have a citizen, she created, she educated, the whole idea of the damn country was that, wasn't it? And in the travel ban, again, you go in what's the easiest? Like, the terrorists in Paris here, a lot of the times are Muslim. Okay, well, that's it. Let's make it. It's like, yeah, but there's, 2 billion? 1 billion?
1.4 billion Muslims in the world?
All right, so it got a little tough now. But you have this, you have this weird, simple thing of, whatever. If we keep going with Trump, and you want to touch all the minorities, because he has managed somehow to, in Chicago, like when he keeps going on about how dangerous it is there, but every time he says it, the police force answer back and going like, "We are asking for help. Help us. Give us more funding so we can have more cops so we can make it." And then you realize that some of this is just to like do something without caring if it's actually going to solve the issue. Like, you can say many things about Chicago not being safe, but if you don't really care about actually putting in money, because it seems that it's not all of Chicago. We hear that, and it's the South. I think it's the South of Chicago that is extremely dangerous. But then the other areas of Chicago are like not as dangerous as other cities. So you're like, well, then we have an issue in that area. Can we put money into, like, is there a social issue we can fix? Cops. We can talk about it that way rather than like, well,
Let's talk about it for a moment in vis-a-vis our respective generations. I'm the boomer, you're the millennial. As a boomer, I could say that I'm ashamed that Donald Trump has emerged from my generation. It pains me to think that he's a contemporary of mine. I wonder, of course, if you think that a Donald Trump could emerge only from a boomer generation, or if a Donald Trump could emerge possibly even from your generation of the millennials. Do you blame the boomer generation for having vomited up this disgraceful man? Do you see him as a paragon of that generation, as an exemplar of that generation, or as one of the unfortunate results of the generation?
That's on one end, I definitely have to blame the generation in the sense of like he is part of the generation. So there is that easy blame I can throw, I guess I'll say. But if one reads the newspapers or the books about him for many years, I think he hasn't been loved for a lot, like since the 80s. So I'm not going to say that it's like someone that your generation looked up to and now became president. He somehow got in there. I think a key issue with Donald Trump might not be a generational thing. So it answers the question about could my generation have someone like him. I think he represents more the older not generation, but the older group in the population that might be a little more scared of change, that is looking and wanting to protect their family and their family values, and they might be looking at values that are older than the progressive that my generation might have. Like how they look at religion, how they look at immigration, how they look at people who are different, because I think the acceptance of a lot of things by my generation, without it being a generational thing, or even it might just be where they're at their lives, and creates a Donald Trump. We had discussions last year about transgender bathrooms, and it was an issue that the president had to talk about. And now we're at the other end of that, because you're like, what? We're not even accepting of people who are a bit away from the white Christian conservative. Like, we're not even talking about anyone who's really different. Like, all the minorities are being, I don't want to say ignored, but definitely are scared right now. So somehow I hope I answered your question, but I'll just swing it back to you on that. Do you think your generation is to blame?
No. I suspect that traits of character, whether they be good or evil, exist in every generation. We have some fabulous people in the baby boomer generation, and I will posit this hope we he who we have propped up, we can also pull down. And I'm sure that the baby boomers in the Democratic Party, in the Congress, and even many among them in the Republican Party are watching the potential impeachment file grow by the day, especially given the potential of this Russia angle to produce evidence that there was collusion with Russian agents during the election to not only undercut Hillary and cast shade on Hillary, but to help Trump. And that is tantamount to treason, if not treason itself. And that could be the explosive Watergate times 10 in the year ahead. I trust. I believe that it could happen. And we will thereby bring down Trump, and it will be a most satisfying and sweet event.
Someone was I was listening to another podcast, and they were discussing that this podcast is in the U.S., so they live in Los Angeles, and they were saying that they had never seen people so united. They realized that they had never seen so many people agree that they disagree with the person. Yes, he does this, does that, but so many people, and I saw it in my social media, it's so many people agree that they don't like what's going on, which you're getting something that people hadn't seen in a while, of like people agreeing on something. And I wonder how many of the apathetic voters out there are now like yelling that they hate what Donald Trump is doing, but those were the people that usually keep quiet about politics. So are we getting a lot of those? Because then it gets dangerous for the establishment. If the people that usually don't vote decide to go vote next time around, you're gonna see, which is a problem my generation and younger generations always have, they don't go out to vote. So, you know, that the vote could be totally changed. Just to touch upon here in Canada quickly, if my generation and younger would decide to go out to vote en masse, it would be a very different parliament. Just very different. Canada would be much more progressive. The liberal ideas would be different. But they don't go out to vote.
The debt would balloon.
Oh, there would be many issues that I'm sure you could discuss. But my point being here is, he is like this evil person.
Yeah.
Seems to be uniting. What you said about Colbert, like everyone cheers and everyone has something to say. All the actors in Hollywood have something to say. So like he is uniting the country. The only issue is a lot of people are suffering in the process. So that's where it's not like...
Which he would call fake news, which brings us to the second general topic that we were going to discuss today. Who to believe, when to believe them, how to differentiate between the truth and untruth. Curiously, I wrote down... first thing I looked at on the web today was the headline on CNN's website. And I wrote down what their headline was based on Trump's speech last night. Quote, "What was true, what wasn't?" This is CNN, which you could call the middle of the mainstream media. And that's the media that Trump has been ranting and raving against and accusing of creating false news. At no time in my experience, and I've been around for quite a number of presidents, at no time have I ever seen the media so blatantly question a president like that. The New York Times has had headlines with the word lie in it. Trump repeats lie about such and such. CNN this morning saying, okay, let's look at his speech and tell you what was true in it and what wasn't. This is an extraordinary time. So we come to our second general topic. You pointed me to Vox, and you mentioned Breitbart, and of course there's a host of venues for us to check out news. I had never gone to Vox. You've pointed me in a new direction. I thought that it was much like MSNBC in that it is very much on the left. But I learned that what they describe themselves as is explanatory journalism, which leads me to suspect that they're taking a position even before they report the news.
Yeah, I mean, I think they could have used the word editorial. Like, there's some news like sites that are just like, they should say we're editorial. Everything is they're accepting that they're editorializing the news. There's no first we'll give you the facts, then this is our little opinion, or this is the editorial section in which we tell you what we think on what happened. I think that line, if you go to a site like that or everything, it just has disappeared. You couldn't, if you have to split this up like a normal, like an old-fashioned newspaper, you wouldn't be able to see where the editorial and where the news part of it comes up.
Good point.
I think the fake news that to give some credit to what Trump is saying, because he said the fake news issues is one, and even for his side to defend him, which is almost tough to do, but there's a reality that when you look at statistics, you can look at them always, it seems, from two different angles. Glass half full, glass half empty. And his point of fake news was that they're always looking at any mistake he makes, anything that if it can be interpreted badly, they'll take that position always. And I guess we could defend him a bit on that, but then he should stop lying so much, which, it's hard to tell when he may have a few correct points where CNN may have overinflated things, because sometimes those headlines that CNN does are a little bit misleading, are a little bit like, okay, they didn't, did the travel ban really affect 100,000 people? How do we get to those numbers? Like, sometimes we have to, even though it's good for our own, what we believe, right? Oh, the travel ban is wrong. It's going to make, it's going to affect a lot of people. Okay, but CNN gave us this number that it's really tough to get, like to come up with how many people were affected by the travel ban. It's a tough, I don't know how you get to that number.
Granted, but we should never forget that we are dealing with a man who said to the American people that he had seen thousands of Muslims cheering the fall of the Twin Towers. After it was pointed out that this never happened, he kept repeating it and would not stand up and say, "I stand corrected." He has never used that phrase, "I stand corrected." He refuses to believe that he's ever wrong. If he is wrong, he says to himself, "I'm going to continue to say it because I know from history that the big lie works." Repeat a big lie often enough, and you get at least a portion of the population to begin believing it.
I feel like you just represented some of those newspapers or our news creators. I don't know what they are, news agencies that exist. The idea that they just keep repeating. I mean, for 8 years, Fox News just made Obama be the devil. Literally, like, Obama needed to be, I don't know, killing orphan kids because he was the worst person alive for them. They would be, I don't think Fox News is completely fake news. I don't even know to where that point begins because, well, if you take what happened, which already, if you look at a normal newspaper, let's call it whatever is right in the middle, not conservative, not liberal, they get so much wrong. It's just part of what happens when it comes to saying the news. So how do we get to fake news? Like, how do we get to, what is the difference between the news that we're used to and we hope we're getting, which already is not 100% correct. I had the discussion with the journalist from the CBC, and I, trying to be nice and defending her, I was like, I also realized we were at a party, and I'm like, if I stop and ask everybody what has happened in the last hour, everyone's going to give different stories. So I also get that when you call a witness, they tell you something that wasn't exactly how it is. So there is that part that is tough too, that you have to get a lot of people to corroborate, and even then you have to make something that looks like a story that may not be 100% correct. Then there is the editorial. Are we allowing for editorial news, which are look at the facts and put them through an opinion and see what fits the narrative that you already have, which I think happens a lot, even with MSNBC, CNN. Like, they need to. There's a lot of, what is it, preaching to the choir? Is that the,
yes.
There's a lot of that going on, and I don't know if I don't want to call that fake news, because I think you can see it from a mile away, and it's unfortunate if you're watching this and you don't realize it. That's something that maybe in high school they can teach more critical thinking and that part. But then we have the fake news, right? Which affect on both sides. This isn't a conservative or a liberal thing. I think the conservative side, the alt-right, even used it magnificently because we have Donald Trump as a president. And I think so much about Hillary Clinton, who is not in jail somehow. I have no idea how. Like, I mean, if we go by the up until November, I would have just assumed that Hillary Clinton would be in jail right now for all the evil things that she was doing.
Now that was fake news,
right? And even they take a little bit of truth and then just add on a whole bunch of lies. They did it to Trump too. Like, that's...
not yet.
There
were 9 investigations of the Benghazi disaster.
No, but do you remember... No, the fake news part. You remember the Russian prostitutes and the peen and all that?
Yeah.
That was... They came out to find out that there was very little truth. In reality, he paid, supposedly even, he paid someone to go pee on someone's bed because he was angry at them.
The bed that the Obamas had slept in Moscow.
Right. So I'm not trying to defend Trump, but also the fake news isn't just a conservative thing that is going on. Just you see some articles that it can go the other way too.
You mentioned Fox having made a villain of Obama for 8 years. Mm-hmm. You sent me also yesterday, you suggested I take a look at Breitbart, which I rarely do, but I did overnight. Breitbart is Fox on steroids. Breitbart strays into conspiracy theory territory. Let's keep in mind that the first Oval Office exclusive interview given by Donald Trump, President of the United States, was to Breitbart.
Right, but he has the co-founder as his security.
That's where we're at now.
Right,
Stephen Bannon is. But let's talk about whether or not your generation, as opposed to mine, believes that so-called mainstream news media, like CNN, I think that your generation regards them, much more so than mine, as ideological institutions. Mm-hmm. They're there to, in Noam Chomsky's words, manufacture consent, get along with the system, support capitalism, don't rebel, go to your circus, here's your bread. Bread and circuses. I perceive in your generation a very heavy emphasis on that belief that we are all being manipulated, that we are marionettes, that there's a puppeteer called the system, and the system employs the CNNs of the world to make us go along.
I have seen that idea that like there is a puppet, or like that we're all being influenced by this, the pharmaceuticals and the military complex and the CEOs. I see that. It's a tough one to accept. I don't think people are that organized.
In your earlier youth.
Oh, I still am. I will still blame a lot of it. I still think that there is a lot of people that we don't talk about, we don't see, that are benefiting from all this that's going on. The same way every time an Olympics are hosted in a country, in a city, we're all like, oh, we spend X amount of billions of dollars. Yeah, we gave that money to someone to build stuff. So there's a group of people that do benefit from hosting an Olympics, and in a lot of the cases, a lot of the things that we see as news, someone is benefiting. Did they orchestrate it, or did they just get lucky and did it? You know what I mean? Like what was the initial question? Just to go back, I went away.
Is the system of mainstream media manufacturing consent in the minds of the masses in order for them not to rebel against the system and overthrow the true masters of our society?
I mean, that would be impressive if this was that organized.
Thank you. I'm glad to hear you say
I mean, I think there is. It's way more fractured. Like, it is happening, but it's just not perfectly. Like, I think there's a lot of different.
So there's no grand conspiracy.
Yeah, look, there is a council, but they just don't meet and don't know each other.
Okay.
You know what I mean? Like, the pharmaceutical people are just they're looking at their things. The bankers are looking at how can we make the most money, and they're all doing their things. And the oil companies are like, how can we make our money? The everyone that has their own thing. The military needs to, whoever the person that makes guns, they have to keep making guns. So, like, they have their thing. I don't think they're all talking to each other. They're not, like... It gets really weird when you see who owns the main media channels. But I feel with the internet in the last 5 to 6 years has really messed that up. Because the CNNs, the Fox News, are being laughed at by laughed at by InfoWars. You know InfoWars?
Yes.
Like, that's, like, no money. You don't have to put that much money... Yet they're getting millions of listeners every month.
No,
So
there's a lot to be optimistic about vis-a-vis your generation, because you grew up with the internet. You get your information from the internet. There are 1,000,001 sources on the internet for you to sift through the news and come to a reasoned judgment. And I think ultimately what your generation is demanding is accountability and transparency. There is the more and more and more transparency because of the openness of communications out there in the world because of the internet. On that note, I think we should continue this in 003 podcast.
Yeah, perfect.
And thanks for meeting with me today.
Perfect. All right. See you next one.